you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description. Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. You are listening to the Delphi case series. This is episode 9, The Wrong Hill. And we will be taking a look at certain assumptions that might have been made that might be false regarding which hill Abigail Williams and Liberty German were instructed to go down by whomever was instructing them to do so. If you haven't checked out the previous episodes, particularly the last one, the most likely theories, including the possibility that the individual that abducted them, either alone or with other individuals, was impersonating a police officer. And if handcuffing one or both of them would enable him control over two individuals. And this is something, not just in this case, but in a lot of unsolved cases, for whatever reason, certain people, it's really bizarre when it's actually true crime aficionados who just, for whatever reason, they just take on blind faith as gospel whatever was reported on their idiot box news channel of choice, as if law enforcement could not be mistaken, as if law enforcement would never make any deceptive statements for whatever reason, either to really try to catch the good guy and prevent false confessions, or because there is some type of police conspiracy. And for the cognitive dissonant coincidence theorists who are just worship authority and bootlick authority at every turn, obviously they've never studied the multitude of cases where a police officer was responsible for a crime, and not only was it all covered up with the department, but not necessarily intentionally. People follow orders. It's just that simple. For whatever reason, in some of these cases, there's just a lot of goofy people out there that prevent cases from being solved with this kind of religious fervor and being married to certain theories for no reason. If you're truly after the truth, you're going to be objective, logical, and neutral, and not fall for these logical fallacies, which is the whole point of the Mindshock podcast, not falling for these fallacies and being objective, logical, and neutral. And of course, the motto of the podcast is, the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal, help support the channel, help us get more episodes out, not only in these series, but in other series, other missing persons cases, and unsolved murders. Obviously, awareness is key in preventing some of these cases from leaving the public eye. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. If that still doesn't work, you just go to youtube.com/Mindshock to manually check for updates and peruse our ever-growing back catalog of various true crime cases, the paranormal, conspiracies, and anything and everything in between with an objective viewpoint. Not biased, not fallacious, unlike all these other podcasts. Make sure you hit the like button if you found this intellectually stimulating and you want to keep awareness up in this case, and you could share the podcast on social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. And I actually can't believe how many people out there just have trouble with basic English comprehension. But I am not alleging anything is true or untrue. That's the difference. I'm not pretending whatever was reported has to be true, and that there can never be any mistakes, unlike other people out there. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. The case is still unsolved, so we really don't know. And all we can do is theorize. If theorizing is not your thing, then this is probably not the podcast for you. This is a logical podcast for logical people. So let's get right to it. This was actually posted on the Delphi Murders subreddit, and there's a lot of true crime subreddits out there with some really astute individuals who constantly examine and re-examine previous assumptions made and what that means for the case as a whole. So here's the post here. The hill that Libby and Abby were told to go down is probably not where you think it is. Does the very steep hill immediately adjacent to the bridge look too risky for a killer to safely navigate while controlling two abducted girls? Unless, of course, he's impersonating a police officer. That opens that door, but we'll continue here. Does it seem odd that a killer who carefully planned his crime would risk failure by taking such a route? Does that path seem illogical for an organized killer to take? Of course it does. That's because it's the wrong hill. The theater ramp. The hill path that Bridge Guy directed the girls to go down actually begins about 40 yards beyond the south end of the bridge. It's located just to the left of the red barrier. The extra distance creates a slope that has an easy, walkable grade and allows for a safe walk to the driveway below and beyond. It's a path that is not covered with brush and used by local homeowners, ATV riders, and deer to traverse levels. It's a path that creates a direct and straight route to the shallow point of the creek and the site where the bodies were found. And this was a post created by a Giant Man 333, and he cites user Ozzy Duger. First brought my attention to the low slope path down the hill when he posted a description, photos, and videos on Reddit in late 2019. He called it a theater ramp, and he wondered aloud why it had gone largely unnoticed. And this opens up a whole lot of cans of worms because there was, of course, that steep hill immediately beyond the bridge. That's where the disturbances were found. And I believe Kelsey German was the one who originally found that disturbance, but I believe other people saw it as well, as if someone were going down there. There were footprints, disturbances, and it seems bizarre that both of these options are not investigated exhaustively. And of course, we're now in 2021. The case is still unsolved. It's time to really go back to the drawing board, if the only reason being to definitively determine that some of these initial alleged facts or assumptions, as you will, are really legitimate. And whether they are or they're not, you just need to definitively examine it again just to make sure. Now, if you really want the truth, what's the harm in making sure? Of course, there's that old adage, trust but verify. On Mindshock, I have a different one, distrust and verify. Now, the reason for distrusting is not that you think that there's some kind of conspiracy or plot to mislead. It's basically just recognizing that humans are fallible. I don't know why that's so triggering for so many people. I mean, you can just go through these comment sections on all the Mindshock podcasts. There are so many goofballs out there that get triggered just by the very notion of verifying the so-called basic facts of any case. I mean, it's just really bizarre. It's as if they don't want it solved. So we have, of course, the driveway nearby. Theoretically, if they weren't killed immediately after, which again, if we factor in the thermal drone camera, I've gone over that on numerous episodes. It's been one of the most triggering topics for some reason. Obviously, the thermal drone camera, combined with the basic science of algor mortis and the rate of cooling of dead bodies, the thermal drone camera would have picked up their bodies. It didn't. And that's not the only piece of information. We have multiple individuals that allegedly searched that exact same area and there were no bodies. If you have even basic cognitive function, what can you conclude there? Now, it might be impossible to conclude anything for certain, but at least you say, okay, well, it was previously searched. The exact area was previously searched. Bodies weren't there. Thermal imaging drone camera didn't pick up the bodies hours later when, of course, the core body temperature would still be relatively high. Even if they went through the cold creek, the rate of cooling still does not support not being picked up by the camera unless they were held submerged in the freezing water for whatever period of time, an extensive period of time, and then moved, in which case it still can't be definitively ruled that they were there because the area was searched. So you have multiple points of reference here for the bodies not being where they were found. Now, again, I'm not saying it's certain that they weren't there, but it's definitely possible. And I don't know why so many goofy individuals find it so triggering to acknowledge the possibility that the crime scene was staged. When we have, again, the former prosecutor stated it was staged, and nobody's seen it other than the people that have seen it. So anybody speculating from the outside, of course, would not know whether it was staged or not. But many crime scenes are staged, so it's not unlikely that it was staged. Maybe it was staged, maybe it wasn't. Maybe the bodies were there, maybe they weren't. But it's very possible that they were not, which means it's possible they were taken elsewhere. That could have been by vehicle as well, especially when we consider it's almost, I don't want to say it's irrelevant which hill, because it does seem relevant. Everything is relevant. We need to clearly establish what may or may not have happened, what is or is not a possibility, and retrace steps backwards, because of course the case is unsolved. Anyone pretending to know what makes sense or doesn't make sense, or any of this nonsense that the coincidence theorists usually peddle, and they say in all these cases where there were cover-ups or conspiracies or major mistakes made, there were endless goofballs saying the same exact thing that people are saying in this case. It makes no sense. It wouldn't be done. Obviously, it was exactly as reported on the idiot box. Law enforcement never makes mistakes. There's no conspiracy. Law enforcement never committed crimes. Everything is above board in this case, no matter what, and they're going to defend it with religious fervor. It's really mind-shocking, the silliness that some people following this case exhibit when just any examination of the basic facts, any questioning of the basic facts is just met with this kind of delusion that it can be known for sure. So the hill does matter, but the farther they get, the closer they're getting to this other driveway. So is it possible that they were taken into a vehicle? And even if they weren't, if this perpetrator is not acting alone, was there someone else with a vehicle there? Did they drive off without the girls? Did they drive off with one of the girls? Because, of course, we do have the timeline issues. Now, I don't know how people can defend the different death dates, because, I mean, again, we're talking post-2000 here. The science is really at a stage where you can determine how long a body has been dead relatively accurately. So for whatever reason the reasons that were given, I mean, parents do not decide the time of death. That's not how it works. The medical examiner or who's ever doing a professional autopsy, the medical examiner, whatever certified official is going to list an approximate time of death. They're not going to default that to the parents. Oh, we don't know. You can pick a date. You can pick the week before. You can pick 5 days before. That's not how it works. So unless, of course, we're dealing with some kind of Keystone cop, Keystone state officials, just Keystone across the board, I don't know how likely that is. Again, maybe everybody's completely incompetent. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily assume that. It's just there's a certain amount of training that has to go into this, and if that were the case, it seems obviously law enforcement does have more information that was given. There's rumors abound. I'm going to read a few comments and rumors in a moment, but just in looking at the map and where the location of the bodies were found compared to which hill we're looking at. So there's a very, very steep hill immediately off the bridge, and then, as stated here, 40 yards beyond, there's another more gradual hill that's a lot easier to navigate. So Continuing on here with this Reddit post, police crime scene tape at entrance. The earliest and best video footage that showed the bridgewalk experience was created by Julie Melvin. She posted her videos on March 5th, 2017, less than 3 weeks after the murders. In her videos, Melvin gave the world an early comprehensive look at the bridge area, including some great footage of the south side as it looked when the crime occurred. I remembered that Melvin took some footage of the south side barrier, so I went back to review her videos. Again, her visit was within weeks of the investigation, and the crime scene tape was still up. At the end of video number 1, Melvin walks off the south end of the bridge. There is no crime scene tape on the steep hill immediately adjacent to the bridge. Then she sees the theater ramp entrance 40 yards in front of her, and it is marked off by police crime scene tape. There would be no reason for the police to secure the entrance to that distant hill path with crime scene tape unless they thought it was used by the killer. So it's clear that law enforcement has known since the beginning that Bridge Guy used the theater ramp slope to bring the girls down the hill. HLN's crime flow map. So even with this evidence, do you think the theater ramp crime flow is a fringe theory and you need to wait before embracing it? Well, think again, because thanks to HLN, the theater ramp theory has now gone mainstream. In the closing minutes of part 1 of HLN's Down the Hill special, the HLN narrator briefly mentioned that Bridge Guy guided the girls down the theater ramp slope to the shallow point in the creek. HLN showed a quick view of the slope and then displayed a map of the crime scene flow. The HLN crime scene flow map clearly shows that Bridge Guy went down the theater ramp slope in a direct route to the shallow part of the creek. Impact on the investigation. So what does this all mean? First, it debunks the illogical theory that Bridge Guy and the girls descended down that very steep embankment where it's unlikely Bridge Guy could have maintained control of the girls and his balance. Now, counterpoint there. Bridge Guy was walking quite swiftly along the bridge, which is a very, very dangerous bridge, and he walked it with extreme confidence. So if he has that much experience, not only just in that area, but the outdoors, maybe hunting, he probably wouldn't have that much trouble navigating a steep hill. I think just a lot of listeners would definitely be able to navigate that steep hill, but not the bridge, not walk swiftly there. So again, perhaps Bridge Guy's deceptive. Some people think he's much younger. Of course, there's just so much misinformation about Bridge Guy and confusion about Bridge Guy. Obviously, the guy they thought was Bridge Guy, that Bridge Guy was arrested, if you haven't checked out the previous Mindshock episodes, and basically ruled no longer a person of interest. What does that mean? Does that mean that Bridge Guy was not the perpetrator, even though he was in the video? Does it mean that the sketch was not made, the sketch is not of Bridge Guy in the video? Does that mean the sketch was made from a variety of people who walked the trails, and this was a amalgamation, a juxtaposition and combination of all these different descriptions roped into one and actually doesn't look like anybody? I don't know. There's so much conflicting information. Doug Carter even stated that there were no witnesses to Bridge Guy. And I went over that on previous episodes. I mean, nothing matches up. There's so much conflicting statements by the police. I don't know how clueless there are people out there have to be to still be lapping up everything law enforcement says as gospel after the amount of problems and conflicting information that has been put forth. Now, that doesn't mean law enforcement doesn't know the real truth, but clearly they haven't been putting it out. And that's an issue. That's a major, major issue, because we really don't know who Bridge Guy is or whether he was really the killer. And if there's multiple killers, he might have not been the primary individual to carry out the crime. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, the crime scene being staged, it might not have been staged by the killer. If there's more than one individual involved, other individuals might have brought the bodies back to frame Ron Logan for, again, reasons we don't have. Now, just because you don't have the reason, just because you don't have the motive, that doesn't mean something is unlikely. You see this level of silliness in a lot of cases, the Delphi case as well. There's a lot of clueless individuals out there. They think that because something doesn't make sense to them, that makes it unlikely. The truth is whatever it is. It's whatever happened. We don't have that information, so to pretend to know whether something is more or less likely, you can do that, of course. I mean, you can muse and give, your own biased opinions, but to remain completely objective, obviously it's difficult, but that's the whole point of Mindshock. So maybe Bridge Guy was the killer, maybe he wasn't. Maybe he lured them. There were other individuals involved, and other people still postulate that the girls might have witnessed some kind of a drug deal gone bad, and one of the individuals maybe posed as a police officer doing a bust. We really don't know. Whoever was not there does not know. It's just that simple, and to pretend to know is as silly as you can get. If you're objective, neutral, and logical, you are after the truth, not reaffirm whatever theories, whatever information was brought forth before in a religious fashion. That would be the opposite of being scientific. And then, of course, according to this Redditor, I don't think he's keeping in mind the impersonating a police officer angle, so if he handcuffed them, he could control them down the steep hill as well. And if there was someone else waiting down at the bottom of that hill, either to take them into a car, to march them to some kind of a barn, there's just so many other theories out there. And to the people that kind of just dismiss all these rumors, which again, they might be false rumors. They very well could be. Every case has false rumors as well, but a lot of old cold cases, it turns out that the initial rumors were true. I mean, the Tara Calico case, which I just covered, there were initial rumors early on about what supposedly happened. And then decades later, it comes out that through more official channels, all of a sudden it's taken more credibly. And that's the thing with some of these cognitive dissonant coincidence theorists and authority worshippers, where they will not believe that police would ever do anything wrong or be mistaken until after the fact and it's all exposed. Where all along, the logical people pointing these things out, they were correct all along, but some of these goofballs just couldn't see it through their just hopeless indoctrination into the cult of authority worship, where they just believe certain perceived authorities or certain people wearing costumes cannot be mistaken or complicit in any crimes ever, no matter what. So it's really, really bizarre. It's really, really bizarre, but it's very possible he did not act alone. So I wouldn't say it's completely impossible that they went down the steep hill. It's possible. And then the other aspect, if one of the girls ran at that point, if someone feels their life is threatened, they're not going to think, oh, this hill is way too steep, let me run it. And especially if he was armed, just making a beeline down that steep hill immediately out of line of sight, perhaps, depending on where Bridge Guy was standing on the hill. Again, we don't know. We really don't know what happened. So since we don't know what happened, we don't know how the crime took place. Now, maybe law enforcement believed it was the more gradual hill. It was the theater ramp, so to speak, what they're calling it here. Maybe they truly believed that and taped it off for that reason, but maybe it really was the steep hill that they went down. Again, we're not going to take anything on blind faith. That's just silliness. We have to examine all possibilities logically and objectively. So continuing on with this post here, second, it suggests that Bridge Guy definitely has a very strong local connection because he had even more knowledge of that secluded wooded area than people previously thought. So how would Bridge Guy have such unusual familiarity with the privately owned south side of the bridge? At the least, it would likely take numerous visits to the south side before one became aware of the theater ramp slope. This crime was definitely not committed by some serial killer trucker who was just passing through town. I mean, I don't know how they could say definitely, because even if this serial killer trucker, if he had hiked that area a couple times, he would still know, or even just maybe once or twice before. Finally, if your favorite YouTube personality has a crime flow scene map that shows Bridge Guy directed the girls down the steep incline and calls everyone a rodeo clown who disagrees with him, you now have the evidence to call his show and tell him that he is the rodeo clown and not you. I mean, you'd both be rodeo clowns, because if you weren't there, you really don't know. And again, looking at these photos, you could see some of the hill from the bridge as well. It didn't have to be the immediate turnoff. Of course, we do have to reconcile this with the reports. Supposedly, unless the reports there were multiple reports of disturbances on the hill. Where were the disturbances? Were they down the steep hill or the gradual hill? I don't know. I believe it was reported initially that it was right after the bridge, but I don't know. I wasn't there. And there's a follow-up here. Okay, it doesn't look that far to me based on the photos, but I will yield to the person who was actually there and checked it out. Because of the distance to the entrance and its proximity to the house, I now think Bridge Guy may have entered the woods at the rail, directed the girls down the small hill, and accessed the theater ramp from the middle. The police crime scene tape was there for a reason. The tape was literally tied between the barrier rail and a tree on the ramp, which is all very, very interesting. But again, if there's multiple perpetrators, if he's posing as a police officer, nothing is for certain. But calling into question the exact path that was taken, obviously that's a good idea. Everything needs to be really nailed down, because if we're building a house of cards and we don't realize that first layer or two are not accurate, we're going to be building and building on something that's not accurate. So that's why going back to square one is always a great idea for cases that are unsolved, instead of religiously clinging to whatever dogmatic theory one comes up with or whatever's on the idiot box. And there's a really solid post here. I'll read a couple of follow-ups here. This makes it far more likely that Bridge Guy was either a local or grew up in the area, in my opinion. Another poster. Although I agree that he is local, the trajectory is straight down. The Monon Trail is a very popular 28-ish miles that people know exists. Those aware of the Monon Trail are locals, no matter how far it stretches. He could use his eyes to choose a path down the slope. Doesn't need to be a local, as in someone in the same town. Sometimes overanalyzing narrows our focus and doesn't broaden it to the idea that local doesn't mean living in town. He could live in the next town over, or even Indianapolis. Which is a good point there. Another follow-up here with some good points. I agree there are more reliable details that suggest the killer is a local. The most reliable ones are the lack of gravity bringing non-locals into the area, other than people from Chicago or Indy, and the statistics of how many travel killers there are versus local killers, even in stranger-on-stranger crimes. I doubt that the killer did not walk down a steep slope is among the top 10 strongest reasons to believe that the killer is a local. However, if this detail does serve a role in answering the local versus non-local question, I agree that it's in favor of local. I think that a key sub-question to discuss this is related to the local-non-local question, is whether the killer could be from Indianapolis or Chicago. So much of the discussion on this forum is just on the higher level question and doesn't have much specific discussion on what details rule these two cities in or out. The last two lines of your comment are dead on, because all this attention to the exact route on the trail are sort of overkill, although interesting, because they don't address the part of the local non-local question that is really up in the air, which is whether Chicago or Indy should be included or excluded. In a post earlier this week, I gave a few reasons why I think the killer is likely local and not from Chicago, Indy, which I'll repeat here for example purposes. A killer in Chicago, Indy would be more comfortable killing in those cities where they have equal or greater anonymity and greater familiarity and greater convenience and a greater chance of combining the moment of having the opportunity with wanting to act on it. The lack of being caught does not point to or away from a local. Anecdotally, the Phoenix Canal killer and the Golden State killer were right there, essentially living next door to their crime scenes in the most obvious way for decades. And there are no facts of this case that make it obvious that the killer would have been identified by now if they were local, or vice versa. The audacity and stupidity of striking so close to home and the would-be cleverness of an alternative plan to travel far away for a strike is not pertinent based on what we know about the factors that killers value most. And there's some good things to think about there. However, again, it's hard because this does not seem like a standard case no matter what. No matter how you plot it out, it's very difficult to make it appear like some kind of standard killing. It does not add up, from the location to the fact that it's two victims, broad daylight, an off day from school, just the tight timelines between the drop off, the pickup, the searches, the Snapchat aspect, the filming aspect. This is not a standard crime by any stretch of the imagination. So, in a way, we can kind of throw out some of these things that would normally point definitively one way or another. It's not definitive here because it's too much of an outlier case. And I do believe in defaulting to probability statistics because, according to the FBI, females that are met with foul play, the perpetrators are someone known to them. So either the significant other or friend, family member, acquaintance, long stalker of some kind, someone known to them, not a stranger. So these statistics, we cannot ignore these statistics. That doesn't mean it wasn't a stranger crime. It could have been, but it would be silly to ignore the statistics and not follow lines of reasoning for the most likely according to statistics. Again, that doesn't mean it happened here. This is an outlier case. But maybe it did happen here. It doesn't mean it didn't either. And between all these family connections, which we'll be getting into, and police connections, there are some rumors that one or both of the girls were supposed to testify on some kind of case at the police station. And many other rumors. Some of these are not rumors in terms of family connections or family arrests. There were issues, and we'll be getting into those. Whether that had anything to do with this, obviously, we don't know. That's still an unknown. And if there was more than one perpetrator, if someone who was impersonating a police officer, that all throws a wrench in the common lines of thinking when it comes to local versus non-local. So a couple other posts here I found interesting. I'm curious why people discuss the possibility that the killer traveled from Chicago or Indy, but not Lafayette, West Lafayette. Lafayette and West Lafayette are closer and are fairly large towns for Indiana. The Purdue student population probably makes them even larger than what the official census would indicate. I wonder whether the Delphi trails were commonly known by word of mouth among the university community. A response here: I have always thought he could be from there. I know when I lived in Bloomington, my friends and I would try to find obscure trails and nature preserves in the area. Things really do spread by word of mouth, and we found lots of cool places in nearby counties that people frequent but that aren't online. It's just a common thing to do in a college town, especially when surrounded by rural Indiana. Someone responded here, I strongly believe this to be the case. The Wabash Heritage Trail provides lots of opportunities for this sort of crime, but it is higher trafficked and can be harder to get out fast depending on where you park. Maybe this pushed him out to the smaller trail systems. I wonder if there are any reports of run-ins with creepy people on the Wabash Trail around this time. That's an interesting point as well. However, I would like to point out that according to locals, supposedly the bridge, under the bridge, that area, it was used to deal drugs by locals, and this is known. Does that throw a wrench in things? Does that make it more likely that the girls stumbled upon some kind of drug deal? Or that these particular girls, because of their age, maybe they didn't know about the drug deals that went on there and they just stumbled upon one in progress, and one of them saw a phone and possibly thought they were filming the drug deal even if they weren't. Now, let's not fall for false dichotomies here. Is it possible that there was some creepy guy on the trails maybe looking for victims? The girls were filming him, they saw him, and then they stumbled upon a drug deal. And then Bridge Guy got scared. He took off. He wanted no part of these other individuals. And the other individuals are responsible for whatever happened to Liberty German and Abigail Williams. Has anyone considered that possibility? Now, I'm not saying it's likely. For whatever reason, there's just so many goofballs out there that think that theorizing means I'm saying that's what happened. I am not saying that that's what happened. These are just theories. Sometimes you have to examine beyond the normal scope of thinking in order to solve crimes, particularly if they're still unsolved. And even if this didn't happen, if examining these theories lead to finding other evidence that points to what actually happened, it's still a very worthwhile exercise. And it happens in a lot of cases where perhaps there's a certain suspect or suspects that are not considered likely, but in following up with them, a different piece of evidence is revealed that leads to the real suspects. Again, this is investigation. Sometimes luck plays a factor. I don't want to necessarily call this luck, but if you're just casting out a wider net of possibilities, you're more likely to stumble upon the truth if the truth is not one of the core theories, which we have no way of knowing, of course. Another good post response here. I've always thought that the only way he leads them down the south side of the bridge to cross the creek is if he was really familiar with the area. That creek is not a small creek, and I'm sure it is much deeper in spots that one would want to wade in February in Indiana. I recall watching the searchers from the helicopter footage were waist deep in spots. The other possibility is that he was clueless of where to take them and went down the south side thinking he would find a secluded area on the south side of the creek, but realized he was too exposed to anyone that might venture onto the bridge. So he made a snap decision to cross the creek to the north side to get out of view from the bridge. My guess is they know from the audio whether or not he knew where he was taking them or if it was touch and go. And that's another interesting point too. If it really was some random guy, he had no clue what he was doing and he possibly crazed, he's just making it up as he goes along. Who knows? Another post here. I don't think it was accidental that one of the more shallow areas of the river is extremely close to where the girls were found. And what better way to get rid of or contaminate any DNA that may be on them, whether it's skin, blood, or other fluids? I mean, they would still be recontaminated because if he attacked them after the crossing. So that doesn't really make sense. And of course, if they didn't even cross the creek, if they were marched elsewhere, either taken by car in the driveway or marched elsewhere without crossing the creek first, again, we don't know. We have the reports of searchers searched the exact areas. Bodies were not there. Thermal imaging drone did not pick up heat signatures. So it's a possibility. We're not gonna cluelessly ascribe likelihoods of whether it's super likely they were there when they're. It's a possibility they were not where they were found, and it was a staged crime scene. That's all I'm gonna say there. It's impossible without more information, to know how likely or unlikely. So it's a possibility they were taken elsewhere, one or both of them. That's the other thing. Are we gonna assume they were kept together the whole time? What if they weren't? What if one of them was killed or injured severely immediately, one of them was not? Again, we don't know what happened. It does seem kind of strange to just randomly walk up to somebody and say, point a gun or otherwise down the hill, and then how would someone react to that? Like, obviously the audio, we still don't know why they won't release the audio that's not part of the actual assault, crime, or murder. Obviously would be grisly. I wouldn't want to listen to it, and I can imagine that the families, it's been reported that they were played the audio, but I'm sure they wouldn't want it out there where it was being played and replayed constantly. That would be very traumatizing. And not that listening to it once isn't traumatizing, but it would be re-traumatizing every time. But why not release the audio leading up to the attack? They've released just such little snippets. There's got to be, as I've stated in the previous episode, there's got to be at least a couple more seconds. At least. There's got to be seconds, if not minutes. And I posed a few theories in the previous episode. If it's a police officer who identified himself as such, or if it's someone impersonating a police officer and not the actual officer, but they just don't want to open that can of worms for whatever reason, and that's why they're not releasing it. I keep going back to the issue, though. There's people walking the trails. I believe throughout the whole day there were upwards of 80 people, if not more, walking those trails. Obviously, much less at the exact minutes that we're talking about in this crime occurring, but there's people walking around. So again, just trying to understand the logistics of how this goes down. Does he handcuff them and then march them across the creek? It seems, I don't know, just thinking offhand, it seems like they wouldn't go across the creek. Why would you bark orders at someone to cross a creek if you're arresting them? it doesn't seem like that's the way you would do it, particularly with people out and about on the trails, possibly crossing the bridge at those moments. It's all too risky. It seems like it would be easier to make some kind of if you're impersonating a police officer or not, or if it's someone known to the girls, maybe it's not Bridge Guy, maybe accomplices, other individuals, whoever. If they had a car waiting, is it possible they went to the car? Is it possible they went willingly with with someone known to them to a certain point, and then at another point it all goes wrong? It just seems any of those scenarios just seem a little bit more likely than some crazed killer pointing a gun at teenagers and telling them to march down a steep slope and then across a creek randomly. I don't know. There might be something missing here. I'm not saying that's not what happened. Again, for the goofs out there who aren't good with English, I'm not saying that's not what happened. It just seems if you take a step back, look at it objectively, it seems like there must have been more going on. Unless this is just the biggest risk taker random killer ever, to be pointing a gun, possibly handcuffing or gagging them when there's people walking the trails around, there's a house and driveway not too far away. There's something missing here. And obviously we don't know what that is. All we can do is theorize, but there's something seems off just about how it's alleged that this crime took place. So I'm going to go over a couple of posts on the previous Mindshock episode on this case, the most likely theory, episode 8, where I discussed the police impersonator. A commenter here, Teresa, stated, he was in the search party. Libby was catfished. She told a friend she was talking to a 19-year-old online and wanted to meet him. So I believe the second sketch is a random image Bridge Guy got off Google Images or something. They were definitely lured and he was very prepared. Possibly posed as a cop and told the girls they were trespassing, cuffed one or both of them. I believe he was in the search party, in the group that found the girls. So his DNA can be explained away. He was at the 2-year press conference. Doug Carter was speaking directly to the killer. He loves deer. His wife is his alibi, so police, in my opinion, know who he is, but they need that one piece. They need to discredit his alibi. This was a sexually motivated crime, something went wrong, or he just loves the power and control. I think he knew the family of Libby. She wouldn't have recognized him or known him well or at all. If she knew him, she would have said on the recording. And that's another point, though. Maybe she did. Again, without the full recording, we really, or at least the full, more of the recording, we really don't have. I mean, what could we do? There's not enough information there. But that's an interesting theory. So if this is not a rumor and a friend can corroborate this, that Libby was indeed talking to some 19-year-old or someone posing as a 19-year-old, whether he was or he wasn't. Or perhaps something got messed up in translation and she was talking to someone else, possibly even older than 19, who knows? And that was one of several individuals responsible for this horrible crime, unless, again, the Bridge Guy is some weird, creepy guy walking the trails that had nothing to do with them being killed. Maybe, who knows? Maybe he was planning to kill them. But if if there were other people there, and he got shooed off or whatever, if there was a drug element, which there might have been, again, we don't know what was going on at that bridge. If the rumors are true and drug dealers do use that area, perhaps the Bridge Guy got afraid of the drug dealers and he left. Even if maybe he was just some weird guy that wanted to yell at the girls for either taking, I mean, there's busybodies out there. They have nothing better to do than yell at people in their day. Perhaps he didn't wish to harm them. He just wanted to yell at them, give them a piece of his mind, of their behavior, or the way he subjectively perceived their behavior. If maybe there was nothing wrong with their behavior, maybe they were laughing, he thought they were laughing at him, maybe they weren't. But there's people out there that they're that busybodies, they like to give people a piece of their mind. Maybe he was not a criminal. maybe the true perpetrators were other individuals. Now, again, I'm not saying this is likely or not likely. I'm saying we have to consider every possible scenario because, again, the case is as of yet unsolved. Another poster here, Cat, posted this. I still firmly believe they were targeted, and this was somebody local that was in the periphery of their families and had been stalking one or both of them and knew about their social media activity due to that stalking. They probably had some kind of past issue with this guy or found him creepy, but they never told anybody about it because of who he was. Seeing him on the bridge startled her enough to start recording, but if they went willingly initially, it's just because she knew him and didn't expect he would murder them despite his creepiness. However, we actually have no idea if they went willingly in reality. He could have chased them to that location. At the same time, I think they haven't officially identified this individual due to a cover-up or it being somebody that nobody would ever suspect. That's very, very interesting. So this comment, very, very interesting. That's another scenario. What if, whether he had a gun or not, if he's walking up on the bridge there. So for the image we have of Bridge Guy, supposedly that's zoomed in from the girls taking photos of themselves. So they weren't necessarily zooming in on him. He was just in the background. Whether they did that on purpose or not, that's another matter. But he's off a ways distance on the bridge. What if when he walked up to them, what if they just ran away before... Again, we don't know where that audio took place. Is that much later? Is it earlier than their encounter at the bridge? I don't know. Again, I'm just speculating. I'm just thinking outside the box here to try to make these pieces fit that it's tough because they don't seem to fit. But if the girls just ran, they couldn't run towards him because he's on the bridge. They might be afraid he pushed them off or whatever. It's too risky. What if they ran before he got that close? Then they could have ran down the steep hill. They just wanted to get away from him. Maybe they didn't think he would follow them down the steep hill because he looks a little bit older and heavyset from a distance. Maybe he's very young and not and just wearing baggy clothing, but from a distance he looks kind of heavyset. Did they run earlier than people think? And that's why everything's kind of a mess. If he pulled out a gun and shot one of them, possibly not even fatally, what would have happened at that point? Would one of the girls want to leave her friend? I don't know, but that gun, supposedly a gunshot would have been heard unless there were other hunters in the area. I don't know the frequency of gunshots or if people would find gunshots strange at that time of day. That's something, again, for locals and trail walkers to chime in on, to kind of give their thoughts on gunshots. But if they did know the guy, let's say they didn't know him well, he's some random creepy guy that they sort of know, maybe they saw him early on the trails, maybe they saw him a different day. Is he known to them in some kind of way, or perhaps, again, to their families? If the sketch is deceptive, I don't know. It's all very, very difficult, and there's some weirdness with law enforcement, which we will, of course, get into a little bit deeper in the next episode. The final comment here, very ominous, that I will read. Actually, there's two more here. Actually, there's quite a few astute comments I'm going to go over here. One posted by Shorty. In the original audio recording played at the first press conference, near the end of the loop, you can hear Bridge Guy say expletive. The full original recording is actually down the hill expletive or expletive down the hill. So there must have been some resistance by at least one of the girls. So either Bridge Guy wasn't posing as a cop or at some point he blew his cover and freaked the girls out. That is interesting as well because, of course, unless, I don't know, if they... Yeah, it's tough because if they believed he was a cop, but then they thought the cop wanted to kill them for whatever reason, it's not necessarily that they would have thought he wasn't a cop, or maybe they did doubt his impersonation. I went over a couple of those scenarios in the previous episode as well. Another post here by Freedom Flag. If it was a crime of opportunity, serial killer, wouldn't they tell the public? Instead, they say no threat to the public. Wouldn't that mean it was an isolated incident? Why wouldn't they try to connect the case to the 2 girls that were murdered in Iowa that was similar? My guess is that it wasn't, and they know that from the recording they heard. Something was going on at the time of the murders, and there is a story to tell us one day. Really, a story that's pretty sad on the police side of things. So that's a good point there. So they know there's no threat to the public. They know somehow it's not a serial killer. How do they know that? There's obviously something on the tape. Does he identify himself on the tape? Or do the girls say a name on the tape? Do they know the guy? Or did the accomplice, if there was an accomplice or 2 or 3, did they call out the perpetrators' names? Is there something on the tape of them talking to each other and they know 1 or 2 of the names? That would be interesting as well. Of course, we don't know. It is Stacy posted this. Yeah, I heard the show was across the river than where the bodies were found, so it makes sense that he said go down the hill, and they walked probably towards his car or vehicle. Then they took off running. 1 lost shoe got shot in a river. He shot the other, drags body to grass. And again, it seems if the bodies were not there at that time, that still doesn't mean something didn't happen and possibly one of the girls didn't get injured either on the way to a car or whatever if they were taken elsewhere. But other posters chimed in that there were no reports of gunfire, so that's interesting. Although I don't know what the time frame was for that. And then depending on the type of gun, how far would it carry? And perhaps it wasn't a firearm, perhaps it was some other type of weapon. Who knows? So, as always, more questions than answers. But without definitive corroboration of any of these main points of the case, it's really difficult to conclude anything or to say what is less or more likely. There's plenty of anomalies and coincidences and plenty more to go over. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the Mindshock podcast in the Delphi case series. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. You could also just go to youtube.com/Mindshock if your notifications are not working. Share this podcast. Hit that like button. Keep awareness up in this case. Awareness and pressure. That's how cases get solved. Not by being forgotten about and pushed into obscurity. You can share the podcast on multiple social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier, so you can help support Mindshock by becoming a patron as well. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.